She doesn't even wear a uniform. Must be here for coffee runs." That's what they said when Layla Rourke walked into Camp Sentinel. No salute, no rank, just a clipboard and quiet eyes. She didn't argue, she just listened to their plans, their assumptions, and their blind spots. So when the SEAL team walked into an ambush in Somalia, it wasn't the commander who got them out. It was the woman they forgot was in the room. 7 days later, she stood silent in the war room as Admiral Renshaw walked in and raised a perfect salute. She was never the assistant. She was the test. And today, we find out who passed. This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The chill of the North Carolina coast bit at Layla Rourke's cheeks, a damp, salty cold that clung to the air like a secret. She adjusted the worn strap of her canvas messenger bag, its faded fabric a perfect complement to her simple navy sweater and jeans. The scuffed sneakers on her feet had seen better days, each scrape and tear a testament to a different kind of mission in a different kind of world. She was a ghost in plain sight, a shadow deliberately cast. Her entire posture was a carefully constructed performance, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, a subtle, almost imperceptible air of uncertainty that screamed, "I don't belong here." This was Camp Sentinel, a fortress of elite training and hardened resolve, and Layla was here to disappear. The security checkpoint was a blur of efficiency and cold politeness. A young Marine, his face a mask of practiced indifference, barely glanced at her contractor ID. His eyes slid over her, registered civilian, and promptly dismissed her as anything other than an administrative inconvenience. "Building 14 down the main road," he mumbled, already turning his attention to the polished Humvee idling behind her. Layla offered a meek nod, a silent thank you that went unacknowledged. The guard's lack of attention was a victory. She wasn't an operative to be scrutinized, not a threat to be assessed. She was a footnote, a necessary piece of the bureaucratic machine that kept this place running, and that was exactly how she needed to be perceived. As she walked, the base unfolded around her in a symphony of controlled power. The rhythmic cadence of synchronized footfalls from a platoon of trainees jogging in formation echoed across the asphalt. The air, thick with the smell of strong coffee, gun oil, and the ever-present scent of salt water, was a stark contrast to the sterile, dusty air of her last assignment. Her eyes, however, weren't taking in the grand spectacle. They were performing an invisible, practiced dance, tracking security camera angles, noting the precise height of the perimeter fence, mentally mapping the locations of potential blind spots and egress points. Every unconscious habit, every ingrained instinct honed over a decade of field operations was on full display. This wasn't a casual stroll, it was a ghost walk. She was a hunter, and the hunting ground was now this very base. The voiceover continued, a low, steady hum, narrating the scene with an intimate familiarity. Every mission starts with a door, a gate, a perimeter, a threshold you have to cross. For Layla Rourke, this was a familiar ritual. Her cover was as thin as tissue paper, but it was fortified by the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, institutional arrogance. The men here, the elite of the elite, would never believe that a threat could walk among them in faded jeans and a tired sweater. They would look, but they would not see. And that in itself was the first victory of the operation. Her canvas bag felt heavier than usual today, not with gear, but with a stack of manila folders, a prop in her performance. Inside, however, was a deceptively simple device, a modified tablet that would allow her to passively monitor the base's internal network, logging data, sifting through traffic, and compiling her initial assessment. This was her true purpose, her real mission, far from the coffee runs and filing she was expected to do. Her confidential evaluation report, a document only a handful of people in Washington had even seen, had already triggered a quiet investigation into SEAL Team 9. The top brass, spurred by a string of recent operational failures in the intelligence community, had decided to launch a covert review of their own assets. And Layla, a ghost with a PhD in international security and a kill count that was classified even to some of her own superiors, was the quiet architect of that review. She was the fuse that had been lit, and the men inside Building 14 were completely unaware that the fire had already started. She found Building 14, a nondescript structure tucked away in the Special Operations compound. The air inside hummed with a different kind of energy, a controlled chaos of maps pinned to walls, computer screens displaying a constant stream of satellite feeds, and the rapid-fire chatter of radio communications. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of ambition and unyielding masculinity. Layla stood for a moment, her gaze sweeping the room, performing her own invisible assessment. She counted 8 men, all in various stages of mission readiness, their bodies radiating a raw, disciplined power. Each man was a weapon, a finely tuned instrument of war, and each man, she knew, would see her not as an equal, but as an inconvenience. She had seen this 100 times before. The unconscious dismissiveness, the casual way these men sized you up and found you wanting, it was a part of their culture, a shield they built around themselves to ward off anything that wasn't a direct tactical threat. Her challenge wasn't just to collect data, but to penetrate that shield, to make them see the value of her work, even if they couldn't see the value in her. A mountain of a man with arms that strained against the sleeves of his uniform broke the silence. Chief Ellis Ortiz, his voice a low rumble, cut through the noise. "Lost, sweetheart?" His dark eyes swept over her dismissively, a clear assessment of her faded clothes and civilian status. "Coffee's in the break room if you're looking for the kitchen staff." The words weren't an insult, not exactly. They were a simple statement of fact, a quick, efficient categorization of a person he deemed insignificant. Layla felt the familiar cold irritation flare in her gut. She had learned to suppress it years ago, had trained herself to turn it into a tool. She met his gaze, not with defiance, but with a practiced, nervous uncertainty. "I'm Layla Rourke," she said, her voice soft and unassuming, just the right amount of unremarkable. "I'm here for the admin support position. Commander Brennan is expecting me." The name seemed to catch Ortiz's attention, but only for a moment. He grunted, a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "Brennan? He's in his office. Don't get in the way." He gestured vaguely toward a door before turning his back, his attention already elsewhere. Layla's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. The first hurdle cleared. The first seeds of her persona, the quiet, unassuming, slightly out-of-place civilian, had been successfully planted. She navigated the room, finding a small, unoccupied desk tucked away in a corner. It was the perfect spot. From here, she could observe everything and be seen by no one. She set down her folders and bag, the sound of the clipboard clattering on the cheap laminate a testament to her fabricated nervousness. The key to a good cover wasn't just in the details you created, but in the ones you left out. A good operative knows when to be a blank canvas, a vessel for other people's assumptions. They saw a woman, not a warrior, a contractor, not a ghost. And in this world of high-stakes operations, that was the most effective disguise of all. The mission briefing was announced with a sharp, commanding voice. Commander Cole Brennan emerged from his office, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the room. He was the kind of man you'd find on a recruitment poster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass. His uniform was immaculate, his movements efficient and precise. He was the embodiment of everything a SEAL was supposed to be. His eyes swept over the room, locking onto Layla for a split second before dismissing her just as quickly as Ortiz had. He didn't even bother with a greeting, simply nodding toward a file on his desk. New admin support. You're here just in time. Start with these reports. I need them filed by classification and date. And the coffee situation is unacceptable. Figure that out. His tone was a casual command, the kind of order he was accustomed to having obeyed without question. Layla picked up the thick manila folder, her fingers brushing against his for a moment. She felt the calluses, the small scar near his wrist, telltale signs of a man who lived and breathed close-quarters combat. He was good, she could see that. But she could also see the arrogance, the kind of rigid confidence that had gotten good people killed in places where a simple assumption was a death sentence. She nodded obediently, her posture reinforcing her subservient role. "Of course, Commander. I'll take care of it right away." As she settled into her corner desk, the mission briefing began. The map on the wall came alive with red pins and tactical annotations. Brennan's laser pointer danced across satellite imagery of Somalia. The target was an American ambassador, Patricia Kellerman, kidnapped 3 days ago. The voiceover now shifted, its tone turning clinical, analytical, a reflection of Layla's own internal process. The plan was sound. Textbooks would call it flawless, but textbooks are written for a world that doesn't exist. They rely on perfect intelligence, flawless execution, and a predictable enemy. The reality, as Layla knew all too well, was a messy, chaotic, and dangerous place where the smallest detail could unravel an entire operation. Brennan laid out the plan with precision. The ambassador was believed to be held in a walled compound approximately 40 kilometers inland, 6 structures inside the perimeter. The team's sources had gone dark. The plan was a best guess scenario, a phrase that made the hairs on Layla's arms stand on end. They would breach the compound, secure the structures one by one, and extract the ambassador. It was a hammer, and the problem was a nail, and Layla watched with a rising, silent dread. Petty Officer Nash, the team's communications specialist, asked about thermal imaging. It was dismissed. Too much interference from generators and cooking fires. Ortiz confirmed that they were essentially going in blind. Doc Jalen Scott, the team's medic, inquired about local assets. Brennan shook his head grimly. Their contacts had vanished. The local militia that took the ambassador was systematically eliminating anyone cooperating with Western forces. The mission, as Layla saw it, was a perfect storm of blind spots and outdated assumptions. Brennan's team was a finely tuned tactical machine, but their engine was fueled by old habits and institutional dogma. They were elite, but they were also arrogant. They dismissed open-source intelligence as Twitter chatter and cultural factors as irrelevant. They couldn't conceive of a world where a local prayer schedule or a social media post could be the key to an entire operation. They had their maps, their satellites, their gear, and their pride. And in the field, Layla knew pride was a deadly luxury. She sat at her desk, her hands meticulously organizing the files Brennan had given her. It was a mundane, mind-numbing task, but her mind was miles away in that Somalian compound. She was mentally mapping the terrain, analyzing the satellite photos that were projected on the wall, her trained eye picking up details that the team's focus on tactical considerations had completely missed. The layout of the compound, the distribution of power and water, the subtle wear on the courtyard paths, these weren't just random details. They were a story, a narrative that told her everything about the people who lived there, their routines and their priorities. It was a story she had learned to read in dusty compounds across 3 continents, a language spoken not in words, but in the silent language of infrastructure and human habit. Her motivation, the deep, personal reason she was here, welled up in her throat like a bitter taste. Years ago, a similar mission, a hostage extraction. Her team, a joint CIA SEAL unit, had been given bad intel. The SEAL commander, a man full of Brennan's same arrogant confidence, had dismissed her warnings about a change in local patrol patterns. He called her a desk jockey, a paper pusher. The mission went sideways. Her intelligence partner, a man she had known for years, a man she had considered family, had been killed in the ambush. The memory was a cold, hard stone in her chest, a constant reminder of the price of institutional pride. She was here to make sure that never happened again. The mission briefing continued, a symphony of bravado and tactical certainty, but for Layla, it was a funeral march. She was watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion, a disaster waiting to happen. The team was exceptional, she knew that, but they were only as good as their intelligence, and their intelligence was fundamentally flawed. Her orders were simple: observe, assess, and do not interfere. But as she watched Brennan and his team prepare to walk into a kill zone, she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her orders were about to change. The voiceover continued, painting a vivid picture of the silent struggle happening inside Layla. Her fingers meticulously sorted files. Her mind raced 100 miles an hour, cataloging every flaw, every vulnerability, every piece of missing information. The team was getting ready to deploy, their movements a choreographed ballet of preparation. They packed gear, checked weapons, and went over mission details one last time. They were confident, they were ready, they were a force of nature, and they were walking into a trap. Layla watched them, a silent observer in the corner, her expression a mask of professional disinterest. She was a ghost, a shadow, a whisper in a room full of shouts, but the quiet storm building inside her was about to become a hurricane. Her mission was to assess, but her instincts, honed by a decade of life-or-death situations, were screaming at her to intervene. The quiet assessment was over. The time for action was drawing near. She had been sent here to watch, but she was about to be forced to act. The satellite images on the wall, grainy and stark, were a mosaic of assumptions. For Commander Cole Brennan and his team, they represented a battlefield, a grid of tactical points, potential threats, and a single high-value target. For Layla Rourke, sitting in her corner, they were a collection of stories they refused to read. She watched them, these elite warriors, as they finalized a plan built on a foundation of guesswork. The mission, as she saw it, wasn't a matter of if it would go wrong, but when. The memory of another briefing room, another group of confident men, another plan filled with fatal flaws, was a cold phantom in her mind. Her professional orders were clear: observe, assess, do not interfere. But her personal history, a scar left by a preventable tragedy, was a ghost that haunted every fiber of her being, a silent scream telling her to break every rule. Layla's hands, which had been meticulously sorting files, stilled. The voiceover narrated her internal conflict. She had trained for this, to be invisible, to be a ghost in the machine, to gather intelligence without influencing the outcome. But the ghost of her past was a powerful presence. It spoke of a fallen partner, of a mission failed not by a lack of bravery, but by a surplus of arrogance. The man who had been her family, a brilliant intelligence analyst with a dry wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of the world, had died because a SEAL commander, much like Brennan, had refused to believe that a local farmer could know more than a multi-million-dollar satellite. Layla had come to Camp Sentinel to prevent history from repeating itself, and in this moment, with the mission minutes away from launch, she knew that silence was no longer an option. She cleared her throat softly, a small, tentative sound that barely registered above the room's controlled hum. 8 pairs of eyes, all focused on the map, shifted toward her with varying degrees of annoyance and curiosity. Commander Brennan's gaze, sharp and impatient, was the most unnerving. "Yes?" His voice was a crisp, impersonal command. Layla felt her heart rate quicken, a physiological response she had long since learned to compartmentalize. She had to play her role perfectly. She couldn't be the expert, she had to be the enthusiastic, but slightly out of her depth, amateur. I don't mean to interrupt, Commander," she began, her voice a little higher than her usual tone, laced with a practiced uncertainty. She pointed a hesitant finger at the projected satellite image. "But I was just looking at these photos, and I noticed something about the Eastern building." A low sigh from Chief Ortiz broke the brief silence, his expression a clear mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Sweetheart, we appreciate the enthusiasm, but—" Brennan held up a hand, a silent command for Ortiz to stop. His eyes, though still skeptical, held a flicker of professional curiosity. "Go on." Layla took a breath, letting her voice regain a hint of its natural clear quality, but still keeping her posture reserved and timid. She wasn't just guessing, she was seeing patterns that her decade in the field had made as obvious as a flashing neon sign. She pointed to a set of small, dark panels on the roof of one of the buildings and a faint line that snaked across the ground. "The Eastern building is the only one with solar panels positioned on the south-facing roof," she explained, her words sounding more like a nervous academic than a seasoned operative. "And there's a dedicated generator line running directly to it. My thesis at Georgetown was on hostage situations in failed states. High-value prisoners are often held in buildings with independent power sources. The solar panels and the generator line suggest this building can operate completely off-grid if they need to go dark quickly. The positioning also gives it the best sight lines to the main entrance while being furthest from potential breach points." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the dismissive silence of a moment ago. It was the silence of men whose tactical certainty had just been shaken by an unexpected variable. Petty Officer Nash, the communications specialist, was the first to speak. "How the hell could you possibly know that?" He wasn't mocking her, he sounded genuinely baffled. Layla's cheeks flushed, a genuine reaction born from the precariousness of her cover. I have a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown. I wrote my thesis on it. I know it's just academic theory, but the patterns seem familiar." Brennan's skepticism hadn't vanished, but it had been replaced by a focused, intense curiosity. He looked at the satellite image again, then back at Layla, his mind racing to reconcile the unassuming woman in front of him with the analytical insight she had just provided. "What else?" he demanded, his voice no longer dismissive, but hungry for more information. Emboldened, but still maintaining her amateurish facade, Layla pointed to another detail. "The foot traffic patterns in the courtyard. See the wear on the path leading to the Eastern building? And those dark spots near the entrance? They could be guard positions. If they're following standard protocols for high-value detainees, they'd want the prisoner isolated, but accessible. The Eastern building fits that profile perfectly. Close enough for easy access for interrogation, far enough from the perimeter to prevent rescue attempts, and with independent systems in case they need to go dark." Ortiz, who had been listening with his arms crossed, was now staring at her with something akin to grudging respect. "Where exactly did you say you went to school?" he muttered, the mockery gone from his voice. "Georgetown," Layla repeated, adding a self-deprecating smile, "though I'm sure real-world experience is completely different." The voiceover now narrated the shift in the room's energy. For the first time since she had arrived at Camp Sentinel, Layla Rourke was no longer a ghost. She was a presence. The men in that room were professionals, and their initial arrogance was being chipped away by the cold, hard logic of her observations. Their pride, a shield they had built around themselves for years, had been breached by a woman in faded jeans who had dared to speak up. The mission was no longer a best-guess scenario. It was a tactical problem with a new variable, her. And in the world of high-stakes operations, a new variable was the most dangerous and potentially the most valuable thing you could have. Brennan was already on the radio, his voice sharp and commanding, requesting enhanced surveillance on the eastern building. Within minutes, the confirmation came back. Thermal imaging had detected a heat signature consistent with a single person on the upper floor, along with 2 guards stationed outside. The room erupted in a controlled, professional excitement as the team began adjusting their tactical plans. Layla watched as Brennan's expression shifted, a silent transformation from skeptical tolerance to grudging professional appreciation. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "That was impressive," he admitted, the words clearly costing him. "Good catch." Layla, playing her part, ducked her head modestly. "Just lucky, I guess. I probably watched too much news." She gathered her things, a gesture of retreat, a way to put the ghost back in the machine. "I should let you get back to planning. Do you need more coffee?" "Actually," Brennan said, his voice thoughtful, "stick around. Your academic perspective might be useful." The voiceover shifted again, setting the scene for the mission itself. Layla's cover had been compromised, but not broken. She had given them just enough to be helpful, without revealing the full depth of her knowledge. The trick now was to maintain that balance, to be useful enough to earn their respect, but naive enough to avoid suspicion. Because if they knew her academic theory came from personally extracting hostages from compounds just like this one, her entire mission would be compromised. Hours later, under the pre-dawn darkness of the Somalian coast, SEAL Team 9's rigid inflatable boat cut through the choppy waters toward shore. Layla sat in the secondary communications center back at Camp Sentinel, a room filled with banks of monitors and the low hum of classified technology. Her official role was to take notes and coordinate coffee runs for the night shift. Her unofficial role was to watch and wait. The primary communications station was manned by Tech Officer Rivers, a tense, focused man whose attention was fixed on the official feeds. Layla was ostensibly organizing files at a secondary console, but her hands moved with a practiced efficiency, accessing systems that should have been far beyond her clearance level. She was monitoring 3 different intelligence feeds that the primary team had dismissed: local news reports, social media chatter, and intercepted low-level communications. She had spent the last 3 hours building a digital picture of the ground truth, a picture that was wildly different from the one the team was seeing. The voiceover described the building tension. Layla was seeing a different narrative. The official intelligence painted a picture of a quiet, predictable approach. But the ground truth, the story told by the people on the ground, was screaming warnings. A series of social media posts, all from different accounts but mentioning foreign visitors from the sea, had popped up along the team's exact route. The local news reports were talking about an unusual increase in militia presence, a detail that the official channels had overlooked. Every instinct she possessed, every lesson learned in the field, was telling her that this was a trap. The militia hadn't been quiet, they had been waiting. She approached Tech Officer Rivers, her voice quiet but firm. "Rivers, I think there might be a problem." Rivers barely glanced up from his screens, his annoyance palpable. "What kind of problem? Shouldn't you be in the break room?" He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Layla's heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pulled up her tablet, showing him the data she had compiled. "I've been monitoring local chatter on social media and news feeds. Multiple posts about increased militia presence along the team's exact route. The timing matches perfectly with our operation window." Rivers's tone was pure, unadulterated dismissal. "Social media? Layla, we have actual intelligence sources. Twitter posts aren't actionable intel. On the main screen, the GPS markers of the team were moving steadily toward the ambush. The mission was in real time, and the clock was ticking down to 0. The voiceover highlighted the urgency. The team was walking into a kill zone. Her mission was to observe, not to intervene. But the ghost in her mind, the memory of her fallen partner, was a powerful presence. She had a choice to make: to follow orders and risk a repeat of her personal tragedy, or to break every rule she had been given and save them. Harrison's voice cut through the comms room, sharp with tension, the sound of gunfire in the background. "Base, we've got a problem. Multiple heat signatures moving to intercept our route. This doesn't match our intelligence." The ambush had been sprung. Rivers, his face a mask of panic, was coordinating with air support, but the nearest assets were 20 minutes out, an eternity in a firefight. "Layla, get out of here!" Rivers yelled, his focus on the crisis unfolding on his screen. "This is no place for civilians!" Layla didn't move. She stepped to an unused communication station and began to type commands. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a practiced, terrifying speed, accessing classified systems that should have been far beyond her clearance level. The voiceover now matched her actions, crisp, authoritative, and focused. The ghost was gone. The operative was in control. Every instinct, every lesson, every sacrifice was culminating in this single moment. She wasn't an analyst anymore. She wasn't an academic. She was a field operative, and she was doing the only thing she knew how to do: surviving. She put on the headset. "SEAL Team 9, this is Base Secondary," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the chaos. "I have eyes on your position, and I can see your problems." Brennan's voice came back, strained and breathless. "Who is this? Where's Rivers?" Layla's tone shifted, becoming the commanding, no-nonsense voice of a seasoned professional. "Never mind that right now. You've got a sniper in the blue building, second floor, east window. He's got Ortiz pinned behind that concrete barrier." "How can you possibly—" Brennan began, disbelief in his voice. "Trust me or die." Layla cut him off. Her voice was pure command, a sound that made no room for doubt. "Doc Scott, there's a drainage culvert 15 meters to your left. It leads to the market square. In 30 seconds, the call to prayer will start from the mosque. Every fighter in that compound will pause for at least 10 seconds. That's your window. Move now." The radio fell silent except for the sounds of gunfire. Layla watched the drone feed, the seconds ticking by like an eternity. Then, a haunting, beautiful sound echoed across the compound, the call to prayer. The muzzle flashes from the ambush position ceased momentarily. "Move now," she commanded. On screen, she watched as SEAL Team 9, a group of men who had dismissed her as a civilian, executed a flawless tactical withdrawal, using the brief respite to reach better cover. Brennan's voice came through the radio, breathless but alive. "Base Secondary, I don't know who you are, but that save just kept us breathing. How did you know about the prayer call timing?" Layla realized too late that she had made a mistake. A desk analyst wouldn't have known that. Rivers, his face a mask of confusion and suspicion, was staring at her. "Layla, what the hell is going on? How do you have access to those systems?" Before she could answer, Brennan's voice crackled through again. "Base, we've reached the secondary extraction point. Package is secure. But I want to know who Base Secondary is when we get back. That person just saved 6 American lives." Layla quietly removed her headset. Her cover was blown. The team was coming home alive, but her mission had just become infinitely more complicated. As Rivers's face, a mixture of puzzlement and dawning realization, began to register the classified access logs, Layla knew that the real questions, were about to begin. She had saved the team, but she had just sacrificed her secret and her mission for them. The ghost was out of the machine, and she wasn't going to be able to put it back in. The team's return was a symphony of quiet relief and adrenaline. The uniforms, once crisp, were now stained with dirt and the residue of combat. Their movements, though exhausted, were still sharp, still professional. But something was different. The camaraderie, the easy banter that usually followed a successful mission, was muted. In its place was a singular, unspoken question that hung in the air like smoke. Who was base secondary? They spoke of the voice, the calm authority that had cut through the chaos. They marveled at the precise, life-saving intel, the knowledge of a local prayer call. Commander Cole Brennan, his face a mask of exhaustion and focused thought, listened to his team's praise. Base secondary, whoever the hell that was, just saved us all. The words were a tribute, a deep and sincere gratitude for the ghost in the machine. But as the voiceover described, the ghost was no longer a ghost to everyone. Layla Rourke had slipped back into her corner, her posture as unassuming as it had been on her first day. She was once again the admin assistant, the civilian in faded jeans, the quiet presence that could be ignored. But the men in that room no longer saw her that way. Their perception had been irrevocably altered. They had been saved by a voice, and their minds, trained for a lifetime of pattern recognition, were now trying to connect the dots. The calm, confident voice they had heard over the radio, and the quiet, nervous woman who sat at her desk organizing files. To a professional, that didn't add up. Chief Ellis Ortiz, his large frame slumped in a chair, was no longer mocking her. The easy condescension he'd shown on her first day was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful intensity. He would glance at her from across the room, his eyes lingering for a second too long, as if trying to reconcile the person he had dismissed with the life-saving intel she had provided. The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing. It was a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. The voiceover now focused on the man who was actively trying to find the missing piece. Tech Officer Rivers, a man whose world was built on logic and data streams, was consumed. The mystery of base secondary was a glaring anomaly in his otherwise perfect digital world. He had pulled the access logs, a routine security measure, and what he found was a contradiction that defied explanation. The systems Layla had accessed, drone feeds, tactical comms, open-source intelligence databases, required clearance levels far beyond anything a civilian contractor should have. It was a massive security breach, or it was something else entirely. Rivers, a professional who had been taught to trust data above all else, was staring at a digital ghost, a phantom who had left a trail of breadcrumbs he couldn't explain. But the most subtle and profound shift was happening with Doc Jalen Scott. Unlike Brennan, who was consumed with the tactical impossibility, or Rivers, who was grappling with the digital contradiction, Doc Scott was wrestling with something far more personal, a memory. He sat alone, meticulously cleaning his medical gear, but his eyes, whenever they found Layla, held a look of profound, dawning recognition. He wasn't looking at the admin assistant, he was looking at a ghost from his past. The voiceover now narrated his inner world, a series of fractured flashbacks that were slowly piecing themselves together. A dusty alley in Syria, the stench of diesel and blood, an op that had gone sideways, a hostage rescue mission, a cluster of armed men closing in, and a team pinned down, their exit cut off. They were dead. He knew it. They all knew it. But then something had changed, a single critical detail, a diversion that came from nowhere. A sudden shift in the enemy's positions that had given them a tiny, impossible window to escape. It was the kind of move that wasn't on any mission plan. It was the work of a single, brilliant ghost. A rumor had circulated later, a whisper among the intelligence community, a shadow from the CIA, an operative with no team, no support, who had saved a US asset from an impossible situation. The mission was classified beyond belief, the operative's identity lost to time and bureaucracy. But now, as Doc Scott looked at Layla, he was seeing her not in the dim light of Camp Sentinel, but in the blinding dust of that Syrian alley. The posture, the quiet intensity, the eyes that saw a world no one else could. It was her, the ghost who had saved them. He kept his silence, a professional's instinct, but a deep, unnerving certainty was growing inside him. He knew her secret, and he knew he had to keep it. The tension finally broke when Commander Brennan, his voice low and devoid of all emotion, called her name. Layla, my office, now. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Layla's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of polite uncertainty. She rose and followed him, the weight of 100 gazes on her back. The confrontation was inevitable. Brennan wasn't looking for answers to her filing skills. He was looking for the truth behind the impossible. He had enough information to know that the woman who made his coffee and the voice that saved his team were one and the same. In the sterile confines of his office, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Brennan's expression was cold, hard, and analytical. Layla, I'm looking at the mission debrief, and I'm looking at your personnel file, and they don't match. His voice was a low growl, a contained fury. Your computer skills, your academic theories, they're not just a coincidence. You access classified systems that require a clearance level you don't have. And your voice was on the radio. You saved my team. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. Who the hell are you? Layla, a master of deflection, held his gaze without flinching. She had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed her response 1,000 times. Commander, I can see how this looks. I've always been good with computers, and my academic background gives me a unique perspective. I've read enough to know how to connect the dots. The lie was a fragile shield, but it was all she had. I'm a civilian contractor, Commander, just here to do a job. The words were a half-truth, a practiced evasion designed to buy her time, but as she spoke them, she knew that the shield was cracking. The man in front of her was a professional, and he knew a lie when he heard one. The confrontation had begun, but the truth, the real truth, was still a long way from being revealed. The confrontation with Layla had ended not with a resolution, but with a new, even more profound mystery. Her evasions had been masterful, her lies a carefully constructed shield of half-truths. But Brennan was a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. He trusted data, and the data was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The voiceover followed his movements, a shadow in the halls of Camp Sentinel as he pursued the truth. The admin assistant had saved his team. That was a fact. The access logs revealed a security breach that should have been impossible. That was a fact. Her personnel file, a sparse and unremarkable document, was a contradiction to everything he had witnessed. That was a fact. Brennan knew the rules of the game. He wasn't going to get answers from her. He was going to get them from the system. He made the calls, navigating the complex, labyrinthine bureaucracy of classified networks. He used his high-level clearance, his reputation, and every bit of professional capital he had earned to cut through the red tape. He requested a full security dossier on Layla Rourke. The response was not immediate. It was slow, deliberate, and coded with layers of professional caution. The voiceover described a digital back and forth, the professional equivalent of a stare down. Then the file came through. It wasn't the neat, comprehensive dossier he expected. It was a heavily redacted document, a ghost file with almost nothing on it. Her academic records were there, Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, but the rest was a blacked-out mystery. The only thing that wasn't redacted was her clearance level, TSSCI with special access programs. The the kind of clearance held by only a handful of people in the entire intelligence community. And her employer, a simple, unassuming line of text, "Other government agency." The words hit Brennan like a physical blow. The professional term, a whisper in military circles, was the official code for the CIA. The woman who had been making his coffee was an operative, an asset, an untouchable shadow with a clearance level that put her on par with some of the highest-ranking officers in the command. The tension, which had been a quiet hum in the background, now exploded into a cold, hard certainty. He wasn't dealing with a security breach, he was dealing with a spy, or more accurately, an evaluation. He was no longer trying to solve a puzzle, he was now a piece in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The voiceover shifted again, setting a new scene. The team was gathered in the debriefing room, the mood still heavy with the memory of the Somalia mission. The chairs were arranged, the screens were on, but the usual post-mission analysis was replaced by a simmering tension. They were talking about base secondary, still unaware that the ghost was sitting in the same room. The door opened and everyone went silent. Admiral Kara Renshaw entered, flanked by 2 aides and a security detail. She was a legend, a woman whose reputation for tactical brilliance and uncompromising professionalism was matched only by her intolerance for incompetence. The team straightened, their posture a collective expression of rigid, disciplined respect. They assumed she was here about the security breach. They assumed they were in for a world of pain. They were wrong. The voiceover detailed the Admiral's entrance with cinematic precision. Admiral Renshaw wasn't just a presence, she was a force of nature. She moved with a quiet, efficient power, her gaze sweeping the room with a sharp, analytical focus that missed nothing. She acknowledged Brennan with a brief, professional nod, her eyes already moving on. She wasn't here for him, she wasn't here for the team, she was here for a much bigger game. The team, a group of men who lived and breathed high-stakes operations, braced for the storm. But the storm they expected was not the storm that was coming. It was a hurricane of revelation, a shockwave that was about to shatter their entire reality. The Admiral spoke, her voice a low, commanding rumble. She congratulated the team on their flawless execution in Somalia, praising their adaptability under fire. Her words were a testament to their bravery, their skill, their professionalism. Brennan's chest swelled with a brief moment of professional pride, but his eyes were still locked on her, a sense of deep unease prickling at the back of his neck. He knew something was coming, he just didn't know what. The Admiral paused, her gaze sweeping over the team one last time before she did something that made Layla's blood run cold. She turned away from the team, away from the commander, and began walking directly toward the corner desk, where Layla sat, clipboard in hand, playing her part as the inconspicuous assistant. The voiceover now reached its climax, the moment of truth. Layla felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She was a ghost no longer. She was the center of attention. The clipboard slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead silence. The team's faces, once masks of professional stoicism, were now etched with confusion. Brennan's eyes widened, a silent, profound understanding dawning in their depths. The Admiral stopped in front of Layla, and then, in a moment that would be burned into the memory of every man in that room forever, Admiral Kara Renshaw, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy, came to rigid attention and rendered a crisp, perfect salute. The silence was deafening. Layla's heart pounded against her ribs. But her training, a lifetime of professional discipline, took over. She returned the salute with the practiced precision of a seasoned field operative, her posture now straight, confident, and unapologetic. The 2 women stood there, 2 of the most powerful and feared professionals in the American intelligence community, an admiral of the Navy and a ghost of the CIA, a silent testament to the raw, unspoken power of the clandestine world. The Admiral held the salute for a long moment before dropping her hand. "Agent Rourke," she said, her voice formal and respectful, "on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command and the United States Navy, I want to thank you for your service to our nation and your invaluable contribution to the success of Operation Neptune's Trident." The words were a revelation, a shockwave that hit the room with the force of a physical blow. The team, who had spent weeks dismissing her, now watched in stunned silence as the Admiral of their command thanked her for her service. The voiceover detailed the full extent of the revelation. Layla Rourke, age 32, PhD, from Johns Hopkins, fluently speaks 7 languages, holds a top-secret clearance with special access programs, a decorated CIA field operative with a field record of 17 successful extractions, a commendation from the Director of Central Intelligence for dismantling 3 terrorist networks in Eastern Europe. The words were a tidal wave of information, a flood of truths that washed away every single assumption they had ever made about her. The coffee girl, the admin assistant, the quiet civilian in the corner, she was none of those things. She was a weapon. She was a ghost. She was a legend. The Admiral's gaze swept over the team, a professional, icy assessment. When the agency offered to loan us their best operative for this assessment, we knew we were getting someone special, she said. We just didn't realize how special until we saw the results. Your preliminary assessment has been reviewed at the highest levels, Agent Rourke. Your recommendations regarding intelligence integration and cultural awareness training have been approved for immediate implementation across all SEAL teams. The words were a thunderclap, a professional reprimand wrapped in a commendation. The team had been tested, they had been found wanting, and their flaws had been exposed not by an enemy, but by the woman they had so casually dismissed. The shock in the room was palpable. The silent, profound realization that their entire worldview had just been shattered by the quiet woman who, just yesterday, had been asked to make their coffee. The silence that followed Admiral Renshaw's departure was more deafening than any explosion. It was the silence of shattered assumptions, of a worldview that had been irrevocably broken. The men of SEAL Team 9, a group who had been taught to trust their instincts above all else, were grappling with the impossible. They had been tested, assessed, and in a single stunning moment found wanting. Commander Cole Brennan, his face a mask of controlled fury and disbelief, looked from the empty space where the Admiral had stood to the woman who was no longer just Layla Rourke. She was Agent Rourke, a ghost of the CIA, a name whispered in clandestine circles, and she had been in their ranks for weeks. The voiceover detailed the internal storm raging within each man. Chief Ortiz, the man who had called her sweetheart, now looked at her with a profound, unnerving respect. Petty Officer Nash, the communications specialist who had dismissed her social media chatter, was pale with the knowledge that his own professional arrogance had almost cost them their lives. And Doc Scott, the man who had secretly remembered her from a mission years ago, watched with a quiet, knowing certainty. The team wasn't just grappling with her identity, they were grappling with their own fallibility. They had judged a book by its cover, and the book, it turned out, was a weapon of incredible power. Layla, her posture now straight and unwavering, let the silence hang in the air for a long, pregnant moment. The act was over, the performance was finished. She was no longer the admin assistant. She was a professional, and she was here to do a job. She set down her clipboard and looked around the room, meeting each man's gaze in turn. Her eyes, once downcast and uncertain, were now clear, sharp, and confident. My mission was a comprehensive assessment of SEAL Team 9's operational effectiveness, interagency cooperation capabilities, and overall value to national security. Interests, she said, her voice a low, steady hum that commanded a different kind of attention than the one she had used before. And yes, I was documenting everything. Every interaction, every briefing, every operational detail. The implication hit them with the force of a physical blow. Their professional lives, their careers, the very existence of their team was now in the hands of the woman they had dismissed as irrelevant. The voiceover described the shift in the room's energy, a tangible, suffocating weight. The team wasn't just embarrassed, they were vulnerable. They had been observed, catalogued, and analyzed. Their weaknesses had been exposed not by an enemy on a far-flung battlefield, but by an operative who had been sitting in their corner, silently taking notes for weeks. The professional facade that they had built around themselves, a shield of tactical certainty and unshakable pride, was now gone. And in its place was a humbling, profound, and deeply uncomfortable realization they had failed the test. Layla's words were blunt, honest, and without apology. She laid out her findings with the precision of a seasoned analyst. Your tactical skills are exceptional. Your unit cohesion is excellent, and your adaptability under fire, as demonstrated in Somalia, is impressive. But, she said, and the word hung in the air, a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, but your institutional arrogance is a liability. You dismissed me as irrelevant for weeks, missing opportunities to leverage my expertise simply because I didn't fit your preconceived notions. You treated intelligence as an afterthought, relying on traditional sources while dismissing open-source information that could have saved you from an ambush. In a real-world scenario, that attitude could cost lives and compromise missions. Brennan absorbed the criticism with a stoic expression, his professional training taking over. He was a professional, and professionals accepted feedback no matter how harsh. "Fair point," he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "What else?" Layla pulled a tablet from her bag, the simple piece of technology now a tool of immense power. She pulled up a series of detailed files, her fingers flying across the screen. Your intelligence analysis capabilities are adequate but not exceptional. Your cultural awareness training needs significant improvement. Half the team couldn't identify basic Islamic prayer schedules, which is fundamental knowledge for operations in Muslim-majority countries. The team was quiet, absorbing the criticism. The arrogant certainty they had worn like a uniform was now gone, replaced by a deep and professional humility. As the team processed her feedback, Layla stepped out for a moment, seeking the quiet of a secluded hallway. The voiceover followed her, a witness to a private human moment. The mask of the cold, professional operative was gone for a moment. Her shoulders, which had been held ramrod straight, now slumped with the weight of her mission. The professional detachment she had maintained for weeks had been a shield, not just for her cover, but for her own emotions. In this private moment, she was just Layla, a woman who had spent weeks in a hostile environment, whose entire career was built on being a ghost, and who had been forced to relive the most painful moment of her life to save a team that had nearly dismissed her out of existence. A single tear, a testament to the emotional toll of her mission, rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away, her hand trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, and in that silent moment, a silent resolve returned to her eyes. The mask went back on. The professional returned. She was here to do a job, and the job wasn't finished. She walked back into the room, her composure and strength reinforced. She looked around the room, seeing these men with new eyes. They were proud, skilled, and dedicated, but they were also capable of growth and adaptation. The way they had accepted her guidance during the Somalia crisis, despite their confusion, suggested they could overcome their institutional blind spots. The Admiral's words, a clear mandate, had set the stage for the next phase. "My assessment isn't complete yet," Layla said, her voice now a little softer, a little more human. "I still need to evaluate how you respond to constructive criticism and whether you can adapt your operational procedures based on new information." Brennan met her gaze directly. "What do you need from us?" he asked, the command in his voice gone, replaced by the earnest, professional inquiry of a man seeking expert consultation. Honesty, cooperation, and a willingness to acknowledge that even the best operators can learn something new, Layla replied. She paused, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. And maybe stop asking me to make coffee. I'm actually terrible at it. I've been buying it from the Starbucks down the road and transferring it to your pot. The team, which had been silent for so long, now broke into a low, rumbling chuckle. Chief Ortiz, his face a mix of embarrassment and genuine amusement, was the first to speak. I knew that coffee was too good to be coming from our machine. Brennan stood up, extending his hand toward her, a gesture of professional humility and respect. Agent Rourke, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Would you be willing to start over? Layla shook his hand, her grip firm and professional. I'd like that, Commander, she replied, but I should warn you, the real evaluation starts now. The voiceover concluded on this high note, the moment of professional trust and respect finally earned. The deception was over. The hard part was just beginning. Layla Rourke had spent weeks as a ghost, an observer, an invisible presence in a world that refused to see her, but now she was a partner, an expert, an asset. And for the first time since arriving at Camp Sentinel, she was genuinely curious to see how this story would end. The 48 hours that had passed since Admiral Renshaw's visit had been a time of profound and irrevocable change. The tension that had once filled the air had been replaced by a different kind of energy, professional respect. The corner desk, a physical representation of Layla Rourke's invisibility, was now empty. She sat at a central workstation in the main operations room, a direct communication link to Langley blinking softly on her screen, a symbolic and literal centerpiece of their new reality. The manila folders and mundane paperwork had been replaced by a constant stream of classified intelligence, tactical assessments, and open-source data streams. The ghost had become a presence, and the men of SEAL Team 9 were adjusting to her new reality. The voiceover detailed the small but significant shifts in their behavior. Layla was no longer the admin assistant. She was a partner, a force multiplier, an asset whose insights were now not just welcomed but actively sought. The easy dismissal had been replaced by a quiet, focused attention. The condescending glances had been replaced by a genuine professional curiosity. The team, a group of men whose entire careers had been built on a rigid sense of hierarchy and operational certainty, had demonstrated a capacity for adaptability that was nothing short of extraordinary. They had been tested, they had been humbled, and they had chosen to learn. Commander Cole Brennan, a man who had once seen her as an inconvenient detail, now saw her as a vital piece of the puzzle. The role reversal was a silent, ongoing performance. One morning he approached her workstation carrying 2 cups of coffee, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup down. "Fair warning, I actually did make this one myself, so it might be terrible." The words, spoken with a hint of a smile, were a peace offering, an acknowledgement of their new reality. Layla, looking up from an analysis of recent terrorist communications intercepts, took a sip and managed not to wince. "It's strong," she replied, her own small diplomatic acknowledgement. "That's a polite way of saying it's awful," Brennan replied with a rare, genuine laugh. "I'm starting to understand why you outsourced the coffee duties." Their conversation was a small, quiet moment of normalcy, a stark contrast to the professional intensity that now defined their interactions. The voiceover highlighted the change in their dynamic. The trust, which had been earned in the chaos of a Somalian firefight, was now being built on the foundation of shared expertise. Layla's insights, once dismissed as academic theory, were now the basis of their operational planning. The team, which had once operated in a silo of tactical certainty, was now integrating her intelligence seamlessly. They were no longer just a SEAL team. They were a joint force unit, a hybrid of tactical precision and clandestine brilliance, and the results were about to speak for themselves. The quiet hum of the room was broken by an urgent beeping from Layla's communication console. Her expression, which had been relaxed, hardened into a mask of professional focus. She pulled up the incoming message, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed additional intelligence feeds. The voiceover narrated the details of the new crisis. 3 American aid workers, kidnapped near Sana'a, Yemen. Initial reports suggested a local militia, a group with a history of using hostages for political leverage and ransom. The State Department was requesting an immediate assessment of rescue feasibility. The team's newfound synergy was about to face its first real test. Brennan was at her side immediately, his posture shifting into operational mode. The team, which had been working on their own tasks, automatically gathered around them. "What is it?" Brennan asked, his voice sharp and focused. "Potential situation developing in Yemen," Layla replied, her fingers moving with a practiced urgency. She pulled up satellite imagery and a host of recent intelligence reports, her mind automatically shifting into operational planning mode. 3 American aid workers missing. Initial reports suggest kidnapping by local militia groups. State wants a feasibility assessment. They want options for extraction if the situation deteriorates. "Timeline?" Chief Ortiz asked, his voice now one of a professional seeking information from a trusted source, not a man looking for a reason to dismiss her. "Unknown," Layla replied. "The aid workers were taken 6 hours ago, but we just received confirmation. Based on the group's previous operations, they'll likely move the hostages within the first 24 hours to a more secure facility. That gives us a narrow window for intervention." The voiceover described the collaborative planning process, a symphony of expertise and trust. Layla was at the center of it all, a brilliant conductor in a room full of master musicians. She was analyzing local chatter, mapping movement patterns and predicting the kidnappers' behavior. Brennan was no longer the sole authority. He was a professional partner, a conduit for her intelligence, and he deferred to her expertise without hesitation. The team, once so rigid in their operational dogma, was now a flexible, adaptable force, their tactical precision guided by her deep, personal knowledge of the region. Together they mapped out a surgical strike window. Layla highlighted a route on the digital map. Her analysis of the kidnappers' poor operational security and predictable patterns now a vital asset. Based on their previous operations, she explained, they'll want to establish communication with authorities within 12 hours to begin ransom negotiations. That gives us a narrow window for intervention. If we can identify the holding location within the next 8 hours, a small team could potentially extract the hostages before they're moved to a more secure facility. After that, it becomes significantly more complicated. The team exchanged glances, processing the implications. This wasn't a hypothetical assessment anymore. This was real-time operational planning, and they were looking to her for guidance. "Agent Rourke," Brennan said formally, his voice now one of a man who had truly learned to trust. "Would you be willing to serve as intelligence liaison for this operation?" Layla felt a surge of satisfaction, not of ego, but of professional purpose. After weeks of being dismissed and marginalized, she was being invited to participate as an equal partner in a critical mission. "I'd be honored to assist, Commander," she replied. The voiceover now detailed the mission itself, a precise, flawless operation born from their new partnership. The pre-dawn darkness of Yemen was their theater. The mission was a surgical strike, a ghost-in-the-night operation that was the direct result of Layla's intelligence. The team's tactical plan, once built on guesswork, was now a precise, targeted attack based on her analysis. The extraction was swift and clean. The hostages were secured, the kidnappers neutralized, and the team was out within the narrow window Layla had predicted. It was a textbook operation, a testament not just to the team's tactical prowess, but to the power of integrated open-source intelligence. The team returned with the hostages, their mission a resounding success. The voiceover described the aftermath, the relief, the quiet triumph in Building 14. They all knew who had their backs. They knew who had read the story in the digital chatter, who had seen the patterns that no one else could. Brennan approached Layla, his face etched with a deep sense of gratitude and professional respect. "I owe you an apology, Layla," he said quietly, his voice low and sincere. "We wasted weeks of your expertise because we couldn't see past our own assumptions." Layla looked at him, seeing genuine regret in his expression. "You're not the first team to make that mistake, Commander, and you won't be the last. The important thing is that you were willing to adapt. For what it's worth," Brennan continued, "your assessment of our weaknesses was accurate. We did let institutional arrogance cloud our judgment, but I want you to know that we're committed to doing better." Layla nodded, feeling some of the tension she had carried for weeks finally beginning to ease. "That's all I can ask for. And for what it's worth, your tactical skills really are exceptional. With better intelligence integration, this team could be one of the most effective units in the entire special operations community." Brennan's expression brightened slightly. "Is that going to be in your final report?" "Among other things," Layla said with a smile, "I'm still documenting your coffee-making deficiencies as a significant operational weakness." Brennan laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him since her cover was blown. "Fair enough. I suppose we all have areas for improvement." The voiceover concluded on this powerful note of earned trust and partnership. The Yemen situation was successfully resolved, and in the process, something fundamental had changed. Layla was no longer an outsider evaluating the team from a distance. She had become, in some small way, part of the team itself. She had come to assess their worthiness, but in the end, they had all proven worthy of each other. The evaluation period was over. The mission, in a sense, was complete. Layla Rourke sat at her central workstation, the once unassuming space now a hub of intelligence and operational planning, but today the screens were dark. The constant stream of data had been silenced. Her hands, which had flown across keyboards with a practiced efficiency for weeks, were now carefully packing away the few personal belongings she had brought with her. A small notebook, a personal tablet, a pen. Her movement was deliberate, a quiet ritual that marked the end of her time at Camp Sentinel. She had come here as a ghost, an observer, an invisible presence in a world that refused to see her. And now she was leaving as a partner, a force of nature, a legend in her own time. She had been sent to assess their worthiness, but in the end she had assessed their capacity for growth. And they had passed. The voiceover reflected on the journey, the transformation that had occurred. The first day felt like a lifetime ago. The faded jeans, the worn messenger bag, the palpable sense of condescension in the air. The team had seen her as an admin assistant, a civilian, a woman who couldn't possibly belong in their world of high-stakes operations. But the truth was a much more complex and profound story. It was a story of institutional arrogance, of shattered assumptions, and of a team that, when faced with its own failings, chose to adapt rather than crumble. Layla had not just evaluated them, she had helped them evolve. She had forced them to see a world beyond their tactical bubble, a world where the most valuable intelligence could be found in a social media post, a local news feed, or a forgotten religious custom. A large shadow fell over her desk. Chief Ellis Ortiz stood there, holding a steaming cup of coffee. It wasn't a condescending gesture, not a command. It was a peace offering, a symbol of their newfound relationship. "Thought you might want one for the road," he said, his voice a low rumble. He set the cup down on her desk. "Don't worry, Doc Scott and I made it ourselves. We actually figured out how the machine works." Layla looked at him, then at the coffee, and a genuine smile, a warm human expression spread across her face. "It smells Good, she said. A lot better than my Starbucks outsourcing. Ortiz actually chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that filled the room. We figured if you're going to be working with us on future operations, we should probably learn how to make decent coffee ourselves. Can't have our intelligence liaison running on bad fuel. The voiceover captured the significance of the moment. The coffee was more than just coffee. It was a symbol. It was a gesture of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of their past failings and their future partnership. The men who had once dismissed her as the coffee girl had now learned to make the coffee themselves, a testament to their willingness to learn, to adapt, and to grow. The man who had once been her fiercest detractor was now her quietest supporter, a professional who had learned to trust a different kind of expertise. As Layla sipped her coffee, another figure approached. Doc Jalen Scott. He stood there for a moment, his eyes so often calm and focused, now holding a deep, profound look of respect and gratitude. He wasn't looking at her as a partner, he was looking at her as a person. "Syria," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That was you. You saved us. I've never forgotten." The voiceover described the weight of his words. The personal confession that finally came to light. The ghost was finally seen. The memory that had haunted Doc Scott for years, the impossible rescue that had saved his team from a certain death, was now finally given a name. Layla Rourke. She had been the ghost in the machine long before she ever arrived at Camp Sentinel. She had been the guardian angel, the silent protector, the intelligence that had saved a team from a trap they never saw coming. Her mission wasn't just an evaluation, it was a continuation of a silent, selfless service that had been her life's work. Layla looked at him, her eyes soft with an understanding that transcended their professional relationship. "That was a long time ago, Doc," she replied quietly. "We all have a job to do." Before Doc Scott could reply, Commander Cole Brennan appeared, holding an official-looking document. He handed it to Layla, his expression a mix of professional formality and genuine warmth. "Your final report was reviewed at the highest levels," he said. "Admiral Renshaw approved your recommendation for increased CIA SEAL cooperation and requested that you be assigned as the permanent intelligence liaison to our team. These are your new orders, Agent Rourke." Layla stared at the document, the words on the page a culmination of everything she had worked for. Her mission was over, but her new life was just beginning. The voiceover described her reaction, a quiet, internal triumph. She had come here to make a recommendation. She had come here to assess a team, and now she was being offered a place on that team. She had been a ghost, an observer, an outsider. But now she was being invited in. She had earned their respect, their trust, and their partnership. She had gone from being a phantom in the corner to a vital, integral part of a world that she had once only observed from the outside. She was a ghost no longer. She was home. Layla looked at Brennan, a small, genuine smile on her face. "You want me to stay?" she asked. "Agent Rourke," he replied, a grin spreading across his face. "We'd be honored to have you. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" Layla asked. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and confident, now held a hint of playful amusement. "No more pretending to be the assistant," he said. "We've learned our lesson about underestimating people. We've learned that the most dangerous intelligence is the kind you don't even know you're missing." Layla laughed, a warm, beautiful sound that filled the room. "Deal," she said, accepting the assignment and the coffee with equal pleasure. "But I'm keeping the corner desk. I like the view." As the team gathered around her, welcoming their newest permanent member, the voiceover concluded, bringing the story to a satisfying and powerful close. The mission was complete, but the real work was just beginning. She had come here to assess their worthiness, but in the end, they had all proven worthy of each other. The team, once so rigid in their arrogance, had learned to adapt. The woman, once so lonely in her clandestine world, had found a home. And the lesson, a universal truth learned in the unforgiving world of special operations, was this: the most dangerous assumptions were often the ones they made about the people standing right beside them. And that is the story of Layla Rourke, the ghost who became a partner. It's a story about the power of unseen expertise, the danger of institutional arrogance, and the profound journey from suspicion to trust. In the end, a team of elite warriors learned a vital lesson that the greatest strength lies not just in what you know, but in your willingness to learn from others, regardless of who they are. Thank you for joining us on this incredible tale. What do you think was the most powerful moment in this story? Let us know in the comments below. We read every one. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to Veteran Biker for more stories that will stay with you, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And for more amazing tales, check out the videos appearing on your screen now.